Okay. Okay, welcome to another program in the Mirawood Center's continuing Presidential Legacy series. So far, we have featured 4 presidential libraries: Lincoln, LBJ, Truman, and FDR. And today, Richard Weld, education specialist at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum, is our special guest. Excuse me. This morning, Richard will kick off a 3-part series highlighting President Gerald Ford and his wife, First Lady Betty Ford. He will start with Part 1, the early years. Part 2, called the DC years, is scheduled next month on Thursday, March 28th. And Part 3, after the White House, will be held Thursday, April 25th. Thank you, Richard. We're very happy to welcome you to the Mirawood Center community. We are all very eager to learn more about the Fords and how their political and personal legacies are still relevant today.
Why, thank you, Laura. Good morning, everybody. I hope we're doing well. My name, as was said, was Richard Weld. I'm the education specialist here at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum. I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so I'm an hour into your future time zone-wise. But it should be a fun chat today. I do have a Q&A slide right at the end, but as things come up, you can certainly put them in the chat to give us a look ahead at what's coming for questions and answers. I'm going to be talking today about the early lives of Gerald and Betty Ford, mostly Jerry, because I'm going to work my way up to 1948 and then take it from there. So first and foremost, let's talk about Jerry's very early youth, baby's first car trip. Jerry was born in 1913, so little bit on the early side. Hold on a second, my slides are misbehaving. Should be, there we go. July 14th, 1913, and believe it or not, Omaha, Nebraska. Now we say that Grand Rapids, Michigan is his hometown. He actually only lived in Omaha for a few days. Turns out his father was abusive, and about a week after his birth, threatened his mother with a carving knife. So she packed up young, Leslie Lynch King was actually his birth name. He was Leslie Lynch King Jr. So she popped the baby in the car, along with, among other things, the baby book, and hit the road. So baby's first car ride was leaving an abusive dad. That's an odd twist to the story. She had family in Chicago and then moved on to Grand Rapids. So Dorothy was the name of his mother, and she was in Grand Rapids raising Jerry, who was an adorable little mop-headed baby. Look at all that beautiful blonde hair. Don't get used to it. It doesn't stick around. But he had started out with a beautiful head of hair and an adorable dog, too. But she met and married a second husband whose name was Gerald Ford, Gerald Rudolph Ford. Jerry was at that time very young, so they simply changed his name to Gerald Rudolph Ford Jr. Not legally, though. His name was still Leslie Lynch King until in his 20s when he legally changed it. He was never actually adopted by Gerald Ford Sr., but he became Jerry Jr. as far as everyone, including himself, knew. She actually married him in 1917. She then had 3 more kids with Gerald Sr., I should say. And those are 3 younger half-brothers for Jerry. So they grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, an adorable little house over on Union Street. They actually had 3 different houses along the way, but that's my favorite looking one. It's the most photogenic. And mom and dad had 3 rules: tell the truth, work hard, and come to dinner on time. So Jerry grew up in a not terribly strict environment where he was given a lot of room to maneuver and grow up and play as a kid. And he liked to get outdoors. He really liked sports. He was fascinated with a lot of community engagement. His parents were both involved in a lot of stuff, and he wanted to be as well. So he wanted to join the Boy Scouts, but there were no Cub Scouts troops in Grand Rapids at the time he was growing up. The Cub Scouts were actually formed in 1916, so he had to wait until he was 12 to become a Boy Scout. And that, again, adorable head of hair. It's on its way out, don't worry. It'll stick around through about college. So he joins the Boy Scouts in 1925 at the age of 12. 3 years later, he makes Eagle Scout at 14, which is, yes, a very quick trip to Eagle Scout. We actually have all of his patches and everything on display upstairs. But he was really engaged and he wanted to learn things. He was very dynamic about this. In 1929, he was one of the first, he's right there in the center, one of the first cohorts, well, a member of the very first cohort, who actually were the guard of honor on Mackinac Island at the fort in northern Michigan. And he described it as a great way to spend a summer. They gave tours, they taught history, they learned a lot about the fort, they had plenty of time to go hiking and fishing, and occasionally they got to fire off the cannons. So, I mean, that's a pretty good way to spend a summer if you're 16, right? You get to spend the entire time on an island with a fort and, you know, fishing and hunting and hiking and shooting off cannons. I'd be up for it. In addition to all of that, well, he went to South High School here in Grand Rapids, and he was a above average student. He was not great in Latin, as you can see. He got pretty much straight C's. The only class he got a D in college was the time he took French. So not the best linguist, but he did okay with English. He was pretty good at sports, obviously. Okay in science, things like that. He was sort of an average student. Where he excelled, actually, was athletically. He was on 3 different teams at his high school and swam for the YMCA swim team. He was really solidly good at all of it. But he wanted to be involved and engaged in the community still. So he actually ran for class president. This was fun because they had to, at the time, choose which political party that was currently active they were going to pretend to represent for their high school. He wanted to be a Republican, but he didn't register early enough, so he wound up as part of the Progressive Party from Teddy Roosevelt, later called the Bull Moose Party, I believe. And so he ran for class president for his senior year. In his first political campaign, he did not make it. Turns out all of his coaches got together and decided that if he was going to be in 3 sports and class president, it wouldn't work out. So they rallied the students to vote against Jerry Ford. The coaches ran a campaign against him. He actually did so well that he got his choice of scholarships for college. He could go to Michigan State University or University of Michigan. Well, by this time, he was thinking he might want to get involved in law, and U of M was a better law school, so he decided to go there on a football scholarship. And at University of Michigan, he went All-American 2 different years, in his sophomore year and junior year. The team went, was just fantastic. They had great winning seasons. Huge deal. This is how he became known as a solid football player, which, you know, solid. He was actually the MVP for his freshman year. They went All-American twice, his sophomore and junior year. But then a lot of the team had graduated when he became a senior, and they were not doing super well in their senior year. Which they also had a bit of a scandal their senior year. They had a home game against Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech came to Ann Arbor, Michigan to play a game, but said, we will not take the field if you play any of your African-American players. At that time, Jerry's roommate for the football team when they were on road games was Willis Ward. And when it came out on campus that Georgia State had said this, the students complained. There were protests, there were marches, there was a big thing in the quad. And Jerry went to his coach and said, if Willis can't play, I'm not playing. And his coach pointed out, well, you are on a football scholarship, so if you don't play, you're out of school, and it's your senior year. Don't do that. And Jerry thought about it, and he asked his dad for advice. And then he went and he talked to Willis Ward, and Willis said, I want you to play. I don't want you getting thrown out of school over this, but I really want the team to go kick their butts. And they proceeded to do so, score of 9-2. It was actually the last game that they won that year, and the last game that Jerry won as a football player. So it was really, though, the moment when Jerry, who had grown up in what at that time Grand Rapids was a small city, the first time he really saw this kind of injustice and discrimination. So he decided what he wanted to do was get more involved again, and he decided to go to law school. Now, U of M has a good law school, but he decided he wanted to change it up because he had already had a reputation at U of M as a jock. So he applied to Yale Law School, and he didn't get in. Now, at this point, he had already had letters of offer from the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, both of whom wanted him to play pro ball for him. And he thought about it, and he thought about it, and instead, he got a job at Yale University as a football coach. Now, they didn't accept him as a student, but they hired him as a coach. And so the first year he was there, he coached football, and then he also coached boxing. So he was double coaching at Yale. And then in his first summer after doing that, when he had the summer off, he went back to U of M and took law school classes. And he went back to Yale with a whole handful of credits, and they accepted him as a student. So he had to work his way into Yale as a law school student. But he was very determined, and that's something you'd see a lot in Jerry's younger life. He saw a goal and he went for it. Eagle Scout in 2 years, worked his way into Yale Law. He was very determined. He figured out what he wanted. He worked his way to it. Now, while he was at Yale, he met this wonderful, beautiful girl, but it's not Betty, so I'm not even going to tell you her name. But she was great. They dated for a little while. She was actually a model. And this is where we like to talk about Jerry was this hometown guy who just, wanted to serve his community and nothing super special. Well, she needed somebody to do some modeling gigs with. So Jerry wound up as a male model for a while, which is not something a lot of people know about Gerald Ford. This is a spread from Look magazine. He did some jobs with her, and then she got a cover. They were going to take a picture of her and a hunky young man in uniform and repaint it then as a cover for Cosmo magazine. And that is a retouched, repainted Gerald Ford on the cover of Cosmo. Now that, very secret information about Jerry. He was a male model. So in addition to working in law school, in addition to doing some modeling, he, for the first time, got involved in national politics. And he worked on the presidential campaign for Wendell Willkie. Everybody remembers President Wendell Willkie, right? No. If you're really, really brave, you go up against FDR in 1940. And Wendell Willkie was a brilliantly brave guy who didn't stand a chance. But it gave Jerry some insight into what a political campaign looked like. And he liked it. He wanted to get, involved. But he was finishing up his graduate school, got his degree from Yale Law, connected with a buddy back in Grand Rapids, and opened a little practice. They went back to Grand Rapids, and this is sort of something from the Grand Rapids Press where they're talking about local celebrities. He opened a little law practice in early 1941. And their goal was to work with small clients. They didn't want to do big corporate law. They wanted to do those people who are having trouble with their landlord. They wanted to do, help the little guy legal practice. Of course, this was 1941. He's a young man. Early 1941, this is November 1941, and of course, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor gets bombed. So Jerry, like a lot of young men, goes out and enlists. In fact, he enlists a week later, December 13th, 1941. 6 days later, he enlists in the Navy. And they take one look at him and said, wow, you've got a law degree, you're very politically involved, you're a smart guy, let's make you an athletic trainer on a base in the South. He's like, wait, I signed up to serve. And they're like, yeah, we really want you to help people learn how to get in shape and stuff. So he was sort of nonplussed about, being a coach in the Navy. And he petitioned for a billet on a ship, actually multiple times. It took him several tries to service overseas during World War II, but he eventually made it. And he was assigned as an assistant navigator on the USS Monterey. In addition to which, he had other duties. he was made the athletics director. So here he is on an aircraft carrier, and he figures out how to lower the elevator for airplanes halfway and turn it into a basketball court. The rules for which he had to be able to take the net down at the minute's notice if there were incoming Japanese aircrafts so that they could launch the airplanes. But that is Jerry, in fact, on the left going up to block a jump shot. He, in fact, could jump. He was very athletic. We love seeing on social media people say, well, who is the most athletic U.S. president ever? Almost entirely the responses are Jerry Ford. He played something like 12 sports throughout the course of his life. But the USS Monterey serves in the South Pacific. He's in through 1945 and comes back to Grand Rapids, settles in, starts his law practice, and is thinking about maybe now that he's seen more of the world, maybe he'll run for Congress and serve his country that way. But let's talk about Betty, because this is where she enters the picture. Betty was born as Elizabeth Ann, aka Betty Bloomer, born in Chicago, April 8th, 1918, but her family moved not long after to Grand Rapids, Michigan. She went to Central High School, which is still across town, still in use. So we still have people who say, I went to the same high school as Betty Ford. Yes, you did. Just, many, many years apart. It's got a lot more computers now. But she was young, she was athletic, she was pretty good looking. She was into dance, in fact. So after she graduated, she went to the Bennington School of Dance in Vermont for a couple of summers, where she drew the attention of a dance entrepreneur and, groundbreaking, trend-setting, everything, named Martha Graham. If you've heard of the Martha Graham Dance Company, Martha Graham recruited Betty to come dance with her in New York City as part of her auxiliary dance troupe. But this is Betty dancing at Carnegie Hall. Now, this will come back up later, but it's during this period that Betty manages to pinch a nerve in her shoulder. We'll talk more about that in part 2 and 3 of this lecture series. So she's dancing for a while, and then she hurts herself. So her mom suggests she come back to Grand Rapids and get a real job, as many moms would. And she went to work for a local department store named Herpelsheimer's. She was the fashion coordinator, but she still loved dancing, so she formed her own performance group. And then she set up a little program where she worked with children with disabilities so she could teach them to move and experience the joy of dance and motion. And it's around 1942 that she marries a salesman by the name of William Warren. Again, not Jerry. Unfortunately, William this was in the 40s. He was not doing well. He could not hold down a job. They moved around several times and he took to drinking. So she left him and was in the process of filing for divorce with him in 1947 when she met Jerry Ford at a party. They were introduced to each other. And then they start heavily dating. She finalizes the divorce. He proposes and says, I want to marry you. I love you dearly, except I have to do something else first. I'm in the process of running for office. And in fact, he was running here in Western Michigan to represent Grand Rapids for Congress as a House of Representatives, 5th District. Now, at that, is the sound cutting out? Laura, are you having that problem? Uh-oh.
Oh, I can hear you.
Uh-oh.
Can you
I'm
not
not
hear me?
sure why the sound is cutting out. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm sorry,
fine.
Jonathan. Maybe on your end. So, anyway, Jerry is running for Congress. He has basically, let's just say that in that time period, if you were running in the 5th district and you were a Republican and you got through the primary, you had won. The Democrats didn't stand a chance in this area at that time. But he was running against an entrenched old school guy who'd had the job for like 30 years, which again was not uncommon at that time. You got in, you got reelected, you got reelected, you got reelected. We'll talk about how that actually is what happens with Jerry. But the election was held in September of 1948. That was the primary. Believe it or not, we just had our primaries yesterday for the November elections. But in 1948, the primary was in September and the general election was in November. It's less than 2 months between the two of them. Partially because they didn't expect they were going to have to campaign at all once they got the nomination as the Republican Party candidate. So he actually campaigned like crazy. He had a Quonset hut set up in town that you could just stop by anytime, and Jerry was there if he wasn't on the road. He had signs, he had billboards. He went out and shook hands and stood in muddy fields all summer long. And, he's still courting Betty, and they're, really thinking about it, planning the wedding. They actually planned the wedding for October. And the grounds that if he wins the primary, he's going to win the general election, which, spoiler alert, he won both the primary and the general election. So by then, he wouldn't have to campaign anymore. They got married. This is, all right, left to right, Gerald Ford Sr., Dorothy Ford, Gerald Ford Jr., Betty, her mother's second husband. I'm not going to get you all the names because there's no quiz later. Yeah, I know. I'm not that kind of educator. There's not going to be a test. Anyway, they got married in October. After he'd won the primary, it was assumed that he was going to win the general. Beautiful dress, beautiful wedding. Lots of great pictures that we have of this from family photo albums. And then they immediately drove off to Ann Arbor, Michigan to watch a University of Michigan football game. That was their honeymoon. That was a one-day honeymoon. And yay, Northwestern lost. Michigan beat them 28-0. So good honeymoon game. But from there, they went on to Owasso, Michigan for a political rally. They stayed in the state through the end of October, through the November election, and then immediately moved to Alexandria, Virginia, where he started his first term as a member of the House of Representatives. So this actually went much faster than I expected it to. I'm usually asking a lot of questions of students, and it's much more interactive. But you've all been very patient, and Keith keeps laughing, which is always fun. So apparently I'm entertaining at least him. But are there any questions about the lives of Jerry and Betty Ford to this point? This has been a real quick whirlwind tour of their youth. You can go live or raise your hand or pop them in the chat.
So Richard, one of my suggestions would be to take down the slides so we can see everybody.
Oh, sure. We can stop sharing that. Or just stop sharing. Come on. And pause share. Stop share. There we go. It hides the buttons from me.
Okay, perfect. So now everybody's here. Like I said before, if you got questions, raise your hand, like this, or digitally, or submit it in the chat. And be free, with your questions. If Richard doesn't know, he'll find out, and we'll follow up with that. So, okay, Fran, you got your first question. So unmute yourself.
Did he get a full scholarship to Yale?
No, he did not. He had to pay his way through it. Not only did he have to work his way into the school, he had to pay his way. So luckily, all of the coaching helped. Good question.
So my question kind of goes back to the beginning with the issue with the game against Georgia.
Yeah.
And they went ahead and played the game. How much do you think that impacted his view on race relations and civil rights? Because obviously that came into much to the forefront of politics later on.
Yes.
I'm just kind of curious how that all came together for the Fords.
Well, it was interesting because we know it did impact his point of view, but he didn't talk about it for decades.
Right.
Actually, he never mentioned this story for years and years and years until one day at a family event he had invited Willis Ward, and Willis was like, "Oh yeah, there's this time when this thing happened," and people were like, "Wait, what? Dad has never told this story." So we know that it influenced his judgment. He decided that, he had always been a big fan of fair play, and he didn't believe that that kind of treatment of anybody was fair or just. We know that he took a stand several times on race rights. Interestingly enough, he is the only U.S. president, past, present, so far, as we can tell, who's ever joined a gay rights organization. He joined in the 90s a group called the Republican Unity Coalition, which was the forerunner of what's now called the Lincoln Republicans.
The Lincoln Days. They used to call it Lincoln Days, right?
Well, so this group came before them, the Log Cabin Republicans. This group was trying to welcome LGBTQ people into the Republican Party. It got crushed by mainstream Republicanism, but he was a member of their board for about a year and a half. So he really did take a lot of stands in terms of rights and such. In fact, he was the president who signed into law the fact that there is a Black History Month. It had been a week previously, but in 1976, he transferred it to Black History Month.
Well, that's a good story because, we look at examples of people who stand up for the right thing, and it's not easy when they do. It's not easy. Some people pay a higher price than others, but they don't make it easy for them. And Gerald Ford you don't think of him as at the forefront of these issues, but clearly he was dealing with them on personal and political level.
In session 2, we're going to talk a lot about how he took it on the chin whenever he made a choice that he thought was the right choice, whether or not it was going to hurt him politically. But we have a hand raised from one of the phone numbers.
Go ahead. You got a question?
314-432-2348. It's like name, rank, and serial number here.
Well, hold on a second. Do that. Maybe. Are you there?
You right? Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. Okay. When we were at Chautauqua, his daughter, Susan Bale Ford, spoke along with Lyndon Johnson's daughter. And it was very interesting because she talked about when her mom had breast surgery, and she took over for her, and how they launched the National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and how she also was active in the Betty Ford Center. So
yes.
She was very nice and very pleasant, and she seemed to take a very active role. She talked a lot, mainly about her mom, not about her dad.
Yes. When we get to next session in the Washington years, we're going to talk about the breast cancer diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we're going to talk about the Betty Ford Clinic in section 3.
Okay.
Yep. I'm just telling the story chronologically. You've read ahead. I approve of that in a student.
Oh, that's okay. I happened to see her, so I took notes,
Yeah, we get to see Susan occasionally here, which is great.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Also, I thought your comment about Betty Ford's first husband, and I didn't even know that she had been married before.
Yeah, when they met, she was in the process of getting divorced. It's much the same thing as with Jerry's girlfriend in graduate school. They are bit players in the romance between Jerry and Betty, who were, in love for their entire lives once they met. It was, so, we were like, yep, she had a previous husband, he had a previous girlfriend, they're over there. They're not really terribly interesting. The only, and when I talk about Dorothy's first husband, Leslie Lynch King Sr., he actually showed up one day when Jerry was in high school working at an ice cream parlor and burger joint, and said he was looking for Leslie Lynch King Jr. Now, by this point, when he was like 17, Jerry, and I think he was 16, Jerry did know that was his birth name, but he also knew that his birth father had never paid any child support. And so he basically very politely talked to the guy for a short period of like an hour, and then I don't think they ever met again. Just did not have any use for his birth father.
So when they moved to Alexandria, did they ever go back to Michigan?
Well, so not to live permanently.
Okay.
They were so, and we'll get into this more next time. He ran every 2 years as a member of
Right.
House of Representatives for re-election, but he kept winning and winning and winning and winning because they just
Right.
kept saying, no, stay there. You're doing a good job. So, and then it was the White House. So
Right.
really, after the White House, they didn't move back to Michigan. They moved to California, except they also had a place in Vail, Colorado. So no, not really. They
Oh,
never
yeah.
really moved back to Michigan. They were still both very involved in the local communities. Betty stayed on, all of her groups that she was part of. Jerry was, still representing Michigan, so they went back frequently. But yeah, they never actually lived in Grand Rapids again.
I never went back to live permanently.
Yeah, not permanently.
Yeah, I have this faint recollection of seeing pictures of their family skiing. So maybe that's why they ended up in Vail. They were big skiers.
Yeah, Jerry fell in love with skiing. And one of the many, okay, so let me see. Football, basketball, baseball. He was the first person to hit a home run grand slam in the congressional baseball team. So football, baseball, basketball, track, swimming, tennis, golf, skiing. I'm missing at least one thing. We have a picture of him playing soccer with Pele, but that was just for, goofing around.
That was a stunt, political stunt.
Did I say tennis? I think I did. Anyway, so yeah, he was all around sports person. He has the reputation for being the clumsiest president we've had, but also the most athletic president. It's sort of a whiplash.
But that's mostly because of Saturday Night Live, isn't it?
Yeah, it was the first season of Saturday Night Live, and they did not have enough stuff to fill the air. So Chevy Chase said, I'll just do some pratfalls and pretend I'm Gerald Ford. They didn't even dress him up much like Gerald Ford.
No, they didn't. I remember that.
Yeah, Jerry was a blonde. And so it was sort of like, you could have done at least a wig, but whatever. However, Jerry had a sense of humor, so he sent his press secretary onto Saturday Night Live that year. So his press secretary was one of the hosts of Saturday Night Live in the first season, and Jerry recorded a couple bits to be shown during that episode, including the iconic "It's Saturday Night," live from New York. So they played along with the gag because Jerry was like that.
And it was actually absurd because he was so athletically inclined.
Yeah, the problem was they were at an airport in, I think, Germany, coming down the stairs off of Air Force One, which are metal. And it was raining, and he was holding Betty's elbow with one hand and an umbrella with the other, and she's holding onto the railing, and he's not, and he slides down the last 4 steps. But it happens right on international television. And the next thing you know, Jerry Ford's a klutz.
Yeah.
But, of course, not long afterwards, he went skiing, and people said, if you go skiing and you fall down, it's just going to make it worse. He said, it's skiing. Everybody falls down.
That's right.
And yet, pictures of him falling down skiing made international news.
Well.
On the other hand, I think he was on like a black diamond when he fell. So it's like, well, I can't ski that well.
But was he ever around? You said that his dad was abusive. Was he ever around, like Clinton was around his father at all when he saw that or experienced any of that when his dad was abusive to his mom?
No, he was only about a week old when his dad threatened his mother with a carving knife, and she just like in the middle of the night packed up the baby and left.
That's good. Good.
Yeah. Dorothy had no room for that kind of thing. She hopped in a car and met some friends at the edge of the state who got her on a train back to Chicago. In fact, all of that's actually in the baby book. If you look at the picture, hold on. It's the we went on the car, and then we went on the train, and then we went to Michigan, and it's like, wow, that's documenting your flight from an abusive husband in the son's baby book. I mean, it's a thing. Yeah. So yeah, first auto ride was to Council Bluffs, and then the first train ride to Chicago, and then a carriage ride, and then left in September for Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she spent about a month in Chicago with her folks, and then moved to Grand Rapids. But yeah.
Okay,
So-
before we close up, anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, again, the reminder, March 28th, which is a Thursday again, we've got part 2, DC years, and then part 3 is after the White House, which is Thursday, April 25th. So mark your calendars, and we're about to hear more about Gerald and Betty Ford.
Spoiler alert, part 2, we will be talking about Watergate, breast cancer, the pardon, the Vietnam War, and all that other fun stuff.
A lot
Okay.
happened.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome. It's been a pleasure telling you about the Fords.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay healthy.
I will do that. I just got over a bug, so thanks. It's a solid goal, staying healthy from here on out.